It started with a toast that wasn't meant for me. "My daughter Claire," my father said proudly, arm around my sister's shoulder, "is everything a Mercer should be. Driven, polished, half the woman her sister will never be." I smiled through the burn of champagne, pretending the room wasn't spinning. I was Harper Ellis, 32, the disappointment, art school dropout turned marketing freelancer, living paycheck to paycheck. My sister Claire worked at a luxury cosmetics empire called Lunaris, the same company whose HR once lost an application. That night, went home to my studio apartment, stared at the peeling paint, and promised myself I'd never attend another dinner where love was rationed like dessert. 3 years later, my parents invited me to brunch. They didn't recognize the woman who stepped out of the black Tesla with their mortgage in her bank account, because I'd just bought the company my sister worked for, and I was about to find out why our family had lied about where the money truly came from. If this story caught your ear, make sure to hit subscribe so we keep bringing you stories that dig deep into truth, guilt, and redemption. And don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We read them all and your words keep us going. It's hard to clap for the sister who built her throne on your silence. The restaurant smelled like white wine and approval. My parents had rented out the back room to celebrate Claire's promotion, executive director at Lunaris Cosmetics. The table gleamed under soft light, every glass perfectly placed, every chair occupied by someone who'd never had to wonder if they were good enough to belong. "Claire's always had that drive," my father said proudly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "She's the kind of person who doesn't wait for opportunities. She creates them." Laughter rippled around the table, the kind reserved for people whose lives always seem to work out. My name hadn't been mentioned once. Not even a polite "how's your work going, Harper?" Not that they'd understand freelance marketing or startups that operated out of coffee shops instead of corner offices. Claire looked stunning in her silver blazer, every hair in place, her smile calculated for perfection. I couldn't hate her for it, but I couldn't admire her either. I'd learned the hard way that envy doesn't hurt as much as invisibility. I reached for my glass, just as my father's voice carried across the table again. "Harper never really understood hard work. She's creative, sure, but you can't live off imagination." My hand froze midair. The words stung more because he didn't mean them to. He was simply stating a fact in the Ellis household ledger. One daughter as an asset, the other a liability. Claire raised her champagne flute and smiled at me across the table. "To being the daughter worth investing in," she said sweetly. Everyone laughed. Everyone but me. The sound of my glass hitting the floor cut through the noise. It shattered in a dozen perfect pieces, sparkling like irony under the chandelier. I mumbled an apology, but no one looked at me. Not really. They just looked at the mess. I walked out before anyone could stop me. The night air hit like a slap, cold, clean, and too quiet. My heels clicked against the sidewalk, sharp against the laughter still echoing from the windows. I told myself I wouldn't cry. Not for them. Not again. That's when I heard the voice. "Rough night?" I turned. A man stood a few feet away, mid-30s, tall, in a dark coat. He wasn't from the party. I would have remembered a face that confident. He stepped closer, his tone calm but knowing, like he'd already seen the whole scene unfold. "You don't belong in there," he said, "but you already know that." I crossed my arms. "And you are?" He smiled faintly and slipped a small white card from his pocket. "Elias Cole. I help people build things that matter." The card was embossed in silver. Cole Strategic Holdings. I looked down at it, confused. "Why are you giving this to me?" He met my eyes with quiet certainty. "Because one day you'll be ready to call. And when you do, everything they said about you will stop being true." He walked away before I could answer. I stood there under the glow of the streetlight, the card trembling in my hand, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had seen me. They called it a hobby until it made money. 6 months after that dinner, my savings account was gasping for air, and my pride was hanging by a thread. Still, I'd never felt more alive. Ty Ramos and I had met during a freelance project gone wrong. He was the tech guy who fixed what my client had broken, and we'd both walked away knowing 2 things. We were underpaid, and we could do better. That's how Ellis and Ramos Creative was born, a boutique marketing firm with no office, no investors, and a website built from a free template. Our business plan was scrawled on a napkin from a diner that still smelled like bacon grease. My parents thought it was cute. Claire thought it was delusional. "It's nice you're staying busy," she'd said with that smile that made compliments sound like condolences. "But marketing? Isn't that just posting things online?" They refused to help with funding. So Ty and I did what underdogs always do. We improvised. Days blurred into nights filled with cheap coffee, ramen cups, and the buzz of laptop fans. We pitched small businesses, local boutiques, and anyone willing to trust two nobodies with their brand. And somehow it started to work. A skincare startup went viral after we built their glow-in-the-dark campaign. A restaurant doubled its bookings after our rebrand. One by one, clients started coming back with friends. Ty handled the analytics. I handled the storytelling. He used to joke that I could make a stapler sound emotional. I told him that was just childhood trauma repurposed for marketing. We worked out of his one-bedroom apartment for months, until the kitchen table became too cluttered with client folders and cold pizza boxes. By then, we'd earned just enough to rent a shared office space downtown. 2 desks, 1 coffee machine, and the kind of hope you could taste in the air. That's when I started hearing whispers about Lunaris. Their numbers were slipping. Market share down 12% in a single quarter. Social media campaigns are flopping. And guess whose department was in charge of product image? Claire's. I told myself I didn't care. But when Ty pulled up their quarterly report, something inside me flickered. The empire that had crowned my sister was cracking, and no one inside seemed to notice. Late one night, as I reviewed ad copy and Ty tinkered with client data, his laptop chimed. He frowned, opened his inbox, and went still. "What is it?" I asked. He turned the screen toward me. It was an email. No subject line. Just a single sentence. "If you want to know why Lunaris is sinking, start with the mirror campaign." Below it, an attached file. And the signature. E.C. Ty glanced at me, cautious. "You know anyone with those initials?" I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Elias Cole, the man from the restaurant. The stranger who'd told me to call when I was ready to build something that mattered. I looked at Ty. "Open it." He clicked the file. The loading bar crept across the screen. And as the first document appeared, I realized Elias hadn't just seen potential in me that night. He'd seen an opportunity to tear down the empire my family worshipped. Strangers don't know family secrets by accident. I met Elias Cole again 3 days after the email arrived. He'd invited me to a cafe downtown. The kind with no prices on the menu and jazz that made everyone whisper. Ty came with me, half convinced it was a scam. But the moment Elias stood to greet us, calm and deliberate, I knew this was no coincidence. He wasn't the kind of man you met by chance. His suit was tailored, his expression unreadable, and his handshake was the kind that came with unspoken leverage. "Harper Ellis," he said, like testing the weight of my name. "I was hoping you'd reach out sooner." Ty raised an eyebrow. "You sent us confidential corporate files, Mr. Cole. You could have just started with, 'Hi.'" Elias smiled faintly. "I wanted to be sure you were curious enough to open them." I crossed my arms. "And what exactly are you trying to show us?" He slid a slim black folder across the table. "Not what Lunaris is now," he said, "but what it used to be, and who it truly belonged to." The first page stopped me cold. It was a corporate registry document dated 1963. Listed as co-founders, Alexander Rhodes and Eleanor Ellis. My grandmother's name. I blinked. That can't be right. My grandmother worked there, but she was. A chemist Elias Fee finished for me. One of the few female formulators in the company's early days. The anti-aging serum that made Lunaris famous. It was her work. Only she never held the patent. My throat went dry. I remembered my mother mentioning that my grandmother used to tinker with things in the garage, but she'd always said it like a hobby. Never history. Elias leaned in. When Rhodes disappeared, his shares and those of his partners went unclaimed. The Ellis portion, 40%, was transferred into a dormant trust under your family name. No one ever filed for it. I looked up sharply. If that's true, why didn't my parents know? "Oh, they knew," he said evenly. "They just couldn't access it. The trust requires verification of lineage, specifically from a living female descendant of Eleanor Ellis." Ty let out a low whistle. "So, that's her," Elias nodded. "It's been locked for 50 years, waiting for someone with your name." My pulse quickened. "Why me? Why now?" "Because," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "Lunaris is about to be sold overseas. And once that happens, the trust expires. The window closes forever." He slid one final document across the table, a stock certificate, yellowed with age but official. The embossed seal shimmered faintly under the cafe lights. Owner, Eleanor M. Ellis. Issued, June 4th, 1963. My grandmother's signature was clear and deliberate, the ink faded but defiant. Elias looked at me steadily. "You asked me once why I gave you that card," he said. "It's because you're sitting on the legacy your family pretended didn't exist." I traced the signature with my fingertip, my heart pounding. For the first time, I realized the empire my sister worked for might have been built on my grandmother's stolen name. Ownership can be stolen, especially from women. The next morning, I spread the certificate across my desk like evidence from a crime scene. The gold seal shimmered faintly beneath the morning light, mocking me. My grandmother's signature, E. Leonard M. Ellis, sat just above a second name written in red ink. Not printed, signed, Alexander Rhodes. There was a faint smudge near the signature line, a small dark stain that looked like blood. I stared at it too long, wondering if it had always been there, or if it was just my guilt staining what was left of her legacy. Elias called that afternoon. "I did some digging," he said. "Eleanor was pressured to sell her shares back to Rhodes before his disappearance, but the transaction was never finalized." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning the buyout check was issued but never deposited. No record of payout. No revocation of ownership. On paper, your grandmother still held equity. Equity that legally transfers to you." I leaned back, my pulse racing. "So if that's true," he finished for me, "you own part of Lunaris. Or at least you could, if you can prove the certificate's authenticity before the company is sold." I could almost hear my father laughing at the idea. "Harper, the disappointment, owns part of Claire's empire. Elias gave me the name of an archive where the company's early legal files were kept. The Portland Historical Business Registry, tucked inside an old courthouse. He said there might be more original contracts, board minutes, maybe even the missing buyout record." I packed my bag and drove there the next morning. The place smelled like paper and dust, like forgotten things waiting to be remembered. A clerk led me to a back room filled with boxes stamped Lunaris Industries, Archive 1960-1970. I slipped on a pair of cotton gloves and began sifting through folders. Contracts typed on onion skin paper, stock transfers, and legal memos. My eyes burned from reading so much history written by men who never expected anyone like me to question it. That's when I heard it. "Harper?" I turned, startled. Claire stood in the doorway, heels clicking against the marble floor. She was holding a takeaway coffee like it belonged in a photo shoot, her expression perfectly calm, but her eyes were sharp. "I got your text," she said. "I didn't text you." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then who did?" I felt my stomach twist. Elias. He wanted her to follow me. But why? She stepped closer, scanning the documents on the table. "You're really going to dig into this old nonsense? Grandma's name, some ancient certificate? You're embarrassing yourself." Her tone was sugar-coated venom, the same voice she'd used at that promotion dinner. I said nothing, just kept flipping through papers, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. When she finally sighed and turned to leave, I caught something at the bottom of the box, an envelope sealed with wax. The label read, "Confidential, do not notify Ellis family." I froze. The handwriting was elegant, looping, deliberate. Not my grandmother's. I reached for it, hands trembling. Claire turned back toward me. "What is that?" I didn't answer, because even before I broke the seal, I already knew. Whatever was inside wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. Some inheritances expire, others wait for courage. The wax seal cracked with a sound that seemed too loud for the empty archive room. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of heavy paper, folded once, the edges yellowed from time. My gloves trembled as I unfolded them. It was a notarized letter, dated October 14th, 1970. The signature at the bottom, Alexander Rhodes. The missing founder of Lunaris. The letter was short, almost mechanical in its language, but every word hit like thunder. Upon my death or disappearance, I leave 40% of Lunaris Industries stock to my silent partner, Mrs. Eleanor M. Ellis, whose contributions have been concealed to protect her from public scrutiny. Let this document serve as legal verification of that partnership. I reread it 3 times. It wasn't a rumor anymore. My grandmother hadn't just worked for Lunaris. She owned part of it. I turned the page over. On the back, stamped faintly but unmistakably, "Received. Legal Affairs, Lunaris Corporate Office, 1971. The letter had made it to their hands. And then it had vanished. Footsteps echoed behind me. I stuffed the document into my folder just as Claire appeared again, pretending to scroll through her phone. "Still playing detective?" she said lightly. "Still playing perfectly?" I shot back. She rolled her eyes and left, the sound of her heels fading like punctuation. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop staring at the letter. I spread it across my desk, next to the stock certificate. The pieces were lining up, but the picture made no sense. Why would my parents keep this buried? I called Elias. He sounded unsurprised. That letter was meant to resurface, he said quietly. Rhodes was planning to expose the board before he disappeared. Disappeared, I repeated. You mean it was erased? He didn't answer, which told me enough. The next day, I confronted my mother. She was sitting in her immaculate kitchen, arranging flowers that didn't need rearranging. I placed the document in front of her. She stared at it, her face draining of color. Where did you find this? In a box labeled "Do not notify Ellis family." Her hands shook. You shouldn't have gone digging, Harper. Then tell me why you hid it. Her lips parted, but the truth came out as barely a whisper. Your grandmother's name would have caused scandal. She wasn't supposed to have owned anything. Graham and I thought it was better this way. Safer. Safer for whom? I asked. She didn't answer. But when she reached for the papers, something else slipped out of the folder. A thin receipt folded in half. It was from Lunaris Corporate Legal, dated 2 years after my grandmother's death. A single line item, payment, confidential settlement agreement. Below the signature line, in careful blue ink, was my mother's name. Miriam Ellis. I looked up, my voice shaking. You took hush money. She flinched like I'd slapped her. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. Money without reason always has one. The check sat on the table between us, its faded ink reflecting the kitchen light. My mother stared at it like it might start explaining itself if she looked long enough. It wasn't about greed, she whispered. It was about stability. Your father thought what? I snapped. Is that stealing from his own mother-in-law an investment strategy? Her eyes darted toward the hallway, as if my grandmother's work, my parents' betrayal, my silence. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, my mother's tone, half guilt, half justification. It wasn't greed, she'd said. It was protection. Protection from the truth. At 2:37 a.m., my phone rang. Elias. Harper, he said, his voice tight. You need to hear this before it hits the news cycle. My pulse jumped. What's going on? Lunaris is being sold, he said. Privately. The board is finalizing the deal with a European conglomerate. They want a full rebrand before the acquisition is announced. I frowned. Why are you telling me this? Because, he said, the buyer's firm reached out to hire an independent agency, a boutique one. They want fresh blood to reshape the image before launch. I froze. Which agency? I asked, even though I already knew. He paused just long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Ellis and Ramos Creative. Ty's voice came from the doorway behind me. We just got the proposal email. He was holding his laptop, his face pale with disbelief. On the screen glowed the subject line. Confidential rebrand bid request. Project Lunaris Rebirth. And beneath it, the contact name of the contracting officer, C. Ellis, Claire. Sometimes fate sends invoices with interest. Ty thought I was insane for saying yes. We can't take on Lunaris, he argued, pacing our small office. It's a conflict of interest, and your sister runs half the company. That's exactly why we're doing it, I said, but not as Ellis and Ramos. We built a shell company in 48 hours. A new LLC, a new domain, clean branding, no trace of my name. Halcyon Creative Partners. I pitched it as a small outside agency from Seattle. Lunaris bit immediately. Apparently, desperation for reinvention outweighed due diligence. By the time we stepped through the glass doors of their Portland headquarters, the weight of irony almost made me laugh. The logo on the lobby wall, my grandmother's invention turned empire, gleamed above a reception desk staffed by interns who looked one exhaustion away from tears. The first week was reconnaissance disguised as work. Ty handled analytics and digital audits while I sat in brand meetings under my alias, Harper Lane, Creative Director. Lunaris was beautiful on the outside and rotten at the core. The company that preaches female empowerment paid its female staff the least. The sustainable packaging they bragged about was mass-produced overseas. Their mentorship program was run by managers who barely knew their employees' names. And Claire? She was a queen with a knife behind every smile. One afternoon, during a department meeting, a junior marketing associate named Jenna misread a data slide. A simple mistake, wrong date range. Claire's voice cut through the room like a blade. Maybe next time you'll check before wasting everyone's time, she said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. Laughter rippled around the table, nervous and cruel. Jenna's face went pale. I wanted to say something. Anything. But the Harper my family knew couldn't risk exposure. The alias kept me safe and silent, so I just watched as my sister turned humiliation into performance art. When the meeting ended, I slipped outside for air. The reflection in the glass door caught me off guard. I looked just like my grandmother in her old photos. Same eyes, same defiance hiding under composure. Maybe bloodlines remember what justice feels like. That's when I heard her voice. "Harper Lane, is it?" I turned.
Vivian Katz stood behind me, poised and deliberate, the kind of woman who'd learned long ago that stillness was power.
Lunaris's CEO. Her tailored suit was the color of ash, her jewelry subtle but old, heirloom wealth. "Yes," I said carefully. "Can I help you?" She studied me, her gaze almost clinical. "You have Eleanor Ellis's eyes." My heart stuttered. "Excuse me?" Vivian stepped closer. "Your grandmother's formula built this company," she said quietly. "And I think you deserve to know the rest." The world tilted. The hum of office chatter faded into silence. I opened my mouth to ask how she knew, but she just turned toward the elevator, her heels clicking like punctuation. "Tomorrow," she said without looking back. My office, bring no one. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving me staring at my own reflection, half truth, half disguise, and a family secret that refused to stay buried. Truth can't be patented forever. Vivian Katz's office didn't look like a CEO's. It looked like a museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Portland skyline, and every wall was lined with portraits of visionary women of beauty science. I counted 5 faces I didn't recognize. None of them was my grandmother's. Vivian motioned me to sit, her movement slow and deliberate. "Close the door," she said. When it clicked shut, she turned toward me, expression unreadable. "You're not really Harper Lane, are you?" My throat tightened. "What makes you say that?" She smiled just a little. "Because I knew Eleanor Ellis personally, and I never forget an Ellis jawline." I didn't answer. Silence was safer. She poured herself coffee, stirred once, then said quietly, "Lunaris's greatest secret isn't in our formulas or branding. It's in who we erase to create them." I felt my chest tighten. "You mean your grandmother?" She crossed to a locked cabinet and removed a small brass key from a chain around her neck. The click echoed through the room as she opened a hidden panel behind her desk, revealing a narrow door to the corporate vault. The air inside smelled of paper, metal, and age. Vivian flipped on a light, illuminating shelves of binders and boxes marked with decades. 1960, 1970, 1980. She led me to the back, where one small black box sat alone. "Eleanor's lab records," she said softly. "They were supposed to be destroyed after the acquisition. I kept them." She lifted the lid. Inside lay a weathered leather ledger, its pages fragile and browned at the edges. She opened to a page marked in faded blue ink, Project Eterna. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandmother's, looping, confident, precise. Next to the formula notes was a line that made my stomach twist. Prototype complete. Final trial pending. Rhodes insists on co-credit. Graham objects. My father's name, in her own handwriting. Vivian watched me read. "The Eterna serum built Lunaris. Your grandmother's innovation made it a global brand. But after her death, your father sold her remaining rights to cover debts. I signed off on it. I was young, scared of losing everything I'd built. I've regretted it for 30 years. I turned the page. There were sketches, chemical ratios, aging timelines, and even my grandmother's side notes about ethics testing and safety protocols. Every entry was dated, signed, and authenticated. "This is proof," I whispered. Vivian nodded. "Proof that Lunaris isn't what it claims, and that part of it still belongs to you." Her gaze softened. "I want to make this right. There's a proposal for a merger, Lunaris, with a philanthropic arm under new leadership. You could be that leadership, Harper. It's the redemption this company needs." I should have felt flattered, but all I felt was heat, grief, fury, vindication, all blending into something sharp. I took out my phone, pretending to check a message, and quietly snapped a photo of the open ledger. Vivian didn't notice, but someone else did. As I slipped out of the vault, the hallway lights flickered on, and a voice froze me mid-step. "Interesting," Claire said, her tone cold as glass. "My little sister stealing company property?" She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her eyes gleaming like she'd just caught her favorite prey. I hid my phone behind my back, pulse hammering. "Care to explain?" she asked. Why the janitor's daughter is snooping in executive storage. The air between us crackled. Truth in one hand, exposure in the other. Jealousy sounds a lot like concern when family says it. Claire didn't wait long to strike. She called me into her office the next morning, a glass box at the corner of the building, big enough to make anyone inside feel small. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Close the door," she said, still typing. The click of her keyboard was sharp and deliberate, like a clock counting down. When she finally met my eyes, her smile was professional, cold, polished, weaponized. "So," she said, "my staff reports that our mystery consultant was found snooping around restricted files." Imagine my surprise when I realized that the consultant was my sister. The air thinned. I kept my expression neutral. "You followed me." She laughed softly. "Don't flatter yourself. I follow everyone when the company's reputation is at risk." "What were you doing in the vault, Harper? Looking for souvenirs?" I took a slow breath. "Looking for truth." "Truth?" She tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "Is that what we're calling corporate espionage now?" "You want the truth?" I said, my voice steady. "Fine. Our grandmother co-founded Lunaris, the serum that made this company billions, her work. Not Rhodes's. Not Dad's deal. Hers." Her face froze. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my voice low. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. boardroom B. Bring your father. Bring your confidence." She narrowed her eyes. "You're bluffing," I smiled. "Then you'll love the board meeting tomorrow." I picked up the ledger copy, slid it back into my folder, and turned to leave. My pulse was steady now, not fear, but clarity. Behind me, Claire's voice followed, tight and brittle. "If you go through with this, you'll regret it." I didn't look back, maybe. But at least it'll be my mistake, not her stolen legacy. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward the truth they'd buried. Family drama sounds better with microphones. The boardroom looked like a stage set for betrayal. 12 leather chairs, glass walls, and a skyline that made Portland look smaller than it felt. Claire sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her smile mechanical. To her right, Vivian Katz adjusted her glasses, calm but watchful. The rest of the Lunaris board, investors, legal counsel, and silent partners sat in a semicircle of polite tension. When I walked in, the whispers started. I didn't blame them. I wasn't supposed to be there, especially not holding a folder thick enough to rewrite the company's history. Miss Ellis, one of the board members, said, eyes flicking from my name badge to my face, "We weren't aware of a presentation scheduled today." "You weren't," I said. "But you'll want to hear this." Claire laughed lightly. "Oh, I'm sure this will be riveting." I ignored her and opened the folder. 50 years ago, my grandmother, Eleanor M. Ellis, co-founded Lunaris Industries. Her anti-aging serum, Project Eterna, became the foundation of this company. What the board didn't know is that her shares were never legally transferred. I slid a copy of the stock certificate across the table, followed by the notarized Rhodes letter and a printed scan of the trust documents Elias uncovered. Elias, seated quietly in the back, stood and stepped forward. "Our firm verified the trust through the Oregon State Register," he said evenly. "The assets were frozen, not dissolved. 40% of Lunaris's founding equity remains unclaimed, and by legal succession, those shares belong to Miss Harper Ellis." A ripple moved through the room. Shock, murmurs, disbelief. Someone whispers impossible. Another reached for their phone. Vivian cleared her throat. "It's not impossible," she said quietly. "It's overdue." She rose, removing a small pin from her blazer and setting it on the table. A golden crescent moon, the original Lunaris logo. "I've carried this guilt for decades," she said. "Eleanor Ellis built the science that made us who we are. I signed away her name to save a company that didn't deserve her. That ends today." Claire stood abruptly. "Vivian, you can't." "I just did." Vivian interrupted, her voice firm. "Effective immediately, I resign as CEO. I recommend Miss Ellis, Harper Ellis, be recognized as the rightful heir to the founding equity, with voting rights and controlling interest." The room erupted, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, phones lighting up like sirens. The legal counsel demanded a recess. One investor shouted about a breach of fiduciary duty. Another whispered that the press would eat this alive. Through it all, Claire sat frozen, her perfect composure unraveling thread by thread. Then the door slammed open. My father, Graham Ellis, stormed in, red-faced, breathless, eyes burning with a fury I hadn't seen since childhood. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he thundered. "Presenting the truth," I said. He pointed at the documents on the table. "You'd destroy your own family for revenge?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Dad, I'm destroying the lie you built to protect one." For a moment, no one breathed. Then, in the stunned silence, the microphones picked up the faintest sound, my father's voice breaking. "Revenge looks different in daylight." The boardroom was silent now. No investors, no reporters, no chaos. Just me and my father, sitting across from each other at the same table where generations of men had signed away women's legacies. Sunlight poured through the glass, catching the dust in the air. The company logo on the far wall, El Unaris, felt smaller now, like a name stripped of its myth. My father leaned back in his chair, his tie loosened, his voice heavy. "You think you've won something here, Harper, but you don't understand what this will cost." I kept my eyes on the folder in front of me. "You mean what it already costs? Grandma's credit, Mom's integrity, my sister's soul?" He flinched. "You don't know what it was like back then. Eleanor was brilliant, too brilliant. The investors didn't trust her. A woman in science was a liability. I was young, and I thought if I could control the narrative, we could survive. So you erased her," I said quietly. He exhaled, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I didn't erase her. I envied her. I thought if I could build something bigger, maybe I'd matter as much as she did. And when Claire came along, she reminded me of that same confidence. I gave her what I thought Eleanor would have wanted." "Your pride," I said. He nodded once. "And it broke both of you." Something inside me cracked open. For years, I'd wanted this moment, to see him face what he'd done. But hearing the weakness in his voice didn't bring satisfaction. "It just hurt. You could have stopped this," I whispered. "You could have told the truth." He looked up, eyes rimmed with red. "And what good would that have done? You'd still resent me and Eleanor would still be gone." I felt tears rising but blinked them back. Maybe it would have given her peace. He reached for my hand but I pulled back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I'm asking you to remember that all of this, the power, the money, it means nothing if it costs you what it cost me." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out a document from my briefcase and set it on the table. "You're right. Power means nothing if it just repeats the cycle." It was a trust deed, newly drafted. I'd signed it that morning, transferring 10% of my Lunaris stake into a nonprofit fund for women innovators in science and design. The Eleanor Ellis Foundation. His eyes widened. "You're giving it away?" "I'm giving it back," I said. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the door. "You sound just like her," he said softly. When he left, I looked at my reflection in the glass wall. The same jawline, the same eyes, but not the same woman. As I gathered my papers, the door opened again. Claire stood there, her expression brittle, mascara smudged. "I quit," she said quietly. "You win." I stood frozen as she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You finally became half the woman they said you weren't." Then she smiled, a sad, broken smile, and walked out. For the first time, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt seen. Power feels quieter when it's earned. A year later, the building looked nothing like the one I'd first stepped into under a fake name. The cold glass panels had been replaced with soft lighting and open art displays. The marble floor shone, but this time it didn't echo fear. It reflected possibility. The sign above the entrance no longer said Lunaris. It said Ellison Rowe Foundation for Ethical Innovation, my firm and my grandmother's legacy, reborn as one. Inside, a crowd gathered for the press event. Journalists, investors, scientists, and students. Cameras lined the back of the room. On stage, the company's new mission statement glowed on a massive screen, "Where truth builds beauty." I walked out in a black suit, simple, sharp, unshaken. Ty stood behind the podium, introducing me with a smile that said we made it. When I stepped up to the microphone, the applause rolled through the room like a wave. Near the back, I saw my parents, my father with his hands clasped tight, my mother dabbing her eyes, both silent, proud, and unsure. I looked at them for only a second before turning to the audience. When I started in this industry, I said, I was told innovation meant sacrifice, that you had to choose between truth and success. But the woman who came before me, Eleanor Ellis, proved you could build something extraordinary without erasing yourself to do it. Behind me, a curtain lifted to reveal her restored portrait, Elena in her lab coat, brushstrokes capturing her quiet brilliance. The plaque beneath read, Eleanor M. Els, the woman they tried to forget. A hush fell over the room. I walked to the base of the portrait and took something from my pocket, an old Lunaris employee badge. Claire's. I placed it beside the plaque, its edges worn but intact. This, I said softly, isn't about revenge. It's about restoration, about telling the truth, even when it costs you comfort. A journalist called out, "What do you say to those who claim you took your family down to build this?" I smiled into the camera lights. Family doesn't define your worth, I said. Truth does. Flashbulbs flickered, and for a moment, I saw my grandmother in every reflection, steady, proud, waiting for me to finish what she started. When the applause rose again, I let myself breathe. Power didn't roar anymore. It hummed quietly, like something earned instead of inherited. As I stepped off the stage, Ty whispered, "You ready for what comes next?" I looked back at the portrait, the badge, the room full of light. They said I wasn't half the woman she was, I said. They were right. I smiled, letting the cameras catch the moment. I became twice the woman they ever imagined.